The phone rang so hard it shook the counter. I had just poured a cup of tea still steaming, and Jaime's shoes were by the door, like always one flipped on its side. "Mrs. Marlowe, this is Carmen from Benito Elementary. You need to come, right now." Her voice was too fast, too thin. "Please, the police are already here." I didn't even ask what happened, just grabbed my coat and keys. The tea was still full on the table when I slammed the door behind me. By the time I reached the school, 2 cruisers were parked along the curb. Their lights weren't on, but every parent gathered outside knew something wasn't right. One officer met me at the gate, called me ma'am, and led me inside with his hand on my back like I was about to collapse. I found Jaime curled up on a chair outside the principal's office, knees tucked into his chest. His backpack Spider-Man frayed at the seams was on the floor beside him. I knelt down, but he didn't look up. Inside, the principal stood awkwardly near the door while another officer unlocked a plastic evidence bag. Inside was an iPad, black case, stickers on the back, one of them a red heart that Jaime must have added. It was unmistakably Delaney's. "This was in his backpack," the officer said, placing it on the desk. "We powered it on expecting school games or a homework file. What we found isn't that." I stood still. "He must have taken it by mistake. He has one at home. They look the same." The officer nodded. "We know. But the content here..." He paused. "There are messages, financial documents, transfers across borders, photos, some involving a man named Calderon." He waited for me to say something, but my mouth had dried up. "We need you to come with us," he said. "There's more you need to see, and the sooner we act, the better." I turned toward the glass window, where Jaime still sat alone, small and shaking. "I'll go," I said quietly, following him into the next room. The room was small, the kind they used for parent meetings or bad news conferences. They closed the door behind me, cutting off the hallway noise. The officer set the iPad on the table and slid it toward me like it might burn through the wood. He said, "You'll see for yourself." I sat down slowly, hands cold, trying to remember if I'd ever seen Delaney use this particular iPad at home. She kept most of her work life tucked away, locked offices, whispered calls, sudden meetings. I used to think it was just professionalism. The screen lit up. Notifications stacked one after another, encrypted email headers, bank transfers, chat threads labeled RS or CR internal only. Then came the photos. Not family. Not Jaime's birthday last week. These were darker, grainy images of shipping containers, handwritten receipts with figures too large to be anything legal, and selfies Delaney had sent from sterile labs in God knows where. Always with a man in the corner of the frame. Same face. Over and over. "Calderon," the officer said, pointing. "We believe he's tied to a laundering ring using pharmaceutical shipments as cover." My stomach turned. Delaney worked for Wellmark, a massive firm that bragged about clean innovation. I'd seen the commercials. I'd bought the medicine. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Neither do we." Yet he said, "But this device was unlocked by your grandson in a public school. We don't think that was part of her plan." He pulled out a second folder. Inside, more photos, maps, internal memos, traced back to a private server with Delaney's ID. It wasn't a mistake. She hadn't stumbled into this. She was building it. "Ma'am, your daughter-in-law's device just gave us the break we've been waiting for. But if she finds out it's missing, she'll know someone's seen this." I closed the folder. My mouth was still dry. I felt myself standing, though I didn't remember deciding to. I need to get Jaime home, and I needed to figure out if I was bringing him back into a house I could no longer trust. He was sitting on the edge of a bench near the school entrance, his little backpack clutched tight to his chest like armor. When he saw me, he stood, but didn't run to me like he usually did. His eyes searched my face, first trying to read something in it. "Am I in trouble?" he asked, voice small. I crouched in front of him, smoothed his curls away from his forehead. "No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. But they took my backpack, and they said it was because of the iPad. I thought it was mine," he said, starting to cry. I just wanted to play the bird game. I know, baby, I whispered. It was an accident. You're okay. He clung to me the whole cab ride home, his hand gripping mine so tightly I could feel the pulse in his wrist. I tried not to show anything, but my mind kept circling what I'd seen, those emails, the photographs, the way Delaney's name was woven into places it didn't belong. When we got inside, the house smelled like lemon floor cleaner and roasted chicken. Delaney was in the kitchen slicing carrots into a pot. She turned to us with her usual bright smile, wiping her hands on a towel. There you two are. I was starting to wonder where you'd run off to. Her eyes lingered just a second too long on Jaime's face, then on mine. Jaime looked down at the floor. I felt his fingers tense in my hand. We had a little mix-up at school, I said carefully. He accidentally brought your iPad. Delaney blinked too fast. Oh, I wondered where it was. That was all. She turned back to the stove, like we'd just told her the weather had changed. Jaime picked at his dinner that night. Alfredo didn't notice he was late again, exhausted, grateful for a warm plate and silence. But I watched Delaney the whole time. Watched the way she smiled at Jaime, touched Alfredo's shoulder, told a story about her meeting, like nothing had happened, like nothing ever could. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that hums after midnight. Jaime was asleep in his room, a soft nightlight spilling through the crack under his door. I had been sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold, listening to the refrigerator hum, trying to decide what silence meant anymore. Then I heard her voice. It came from the hallway, soft, controlled, but strained. I followed the sound until I reached her office door, the one she always kept locked. Tonight it was open a few inches. I didn't mean to listen, but the tone in her voice stopped me. Yes, Wes, I have it. No, it's not safe here. A pause. He's just a child. He didn't mean to. I'm handling it. My hand froze on the doorframe. Wes Calderon. The same name the detective had mentioned in passing at the station. The man in those photos. I could hear her pacing, her voice dropping low. If they saw the transfers were finished. I'll clean the devices tonight. Don't call again. I pulled my phone from my pocket, hit record, and held my breath. Every word came through sharp and clear, the sound of her heels crossing the floor, a drawer sliding shut, a zip of a bag. Then silence. I backed away, careful not to make the wood creak beneath my feet. My pulse hammered so loud, I thought she might hear it. When I reached my room, I sat on the edge of the bed, phone shaking in my hands. The recording was barely a minute long, but it was enough. By morning, I had already made up my mind. I called Detective Moyer, told him there was something he needed to hear. His tone changed as soon as I said her name. Bring it in today, he said. And come alone. I ended the call, glanced toward the hallway, where her office door was still closed, and started getting dressed. Detective Moyer led me down a corridor lined with frosted windows and silence. He didn't speak until we were behind a heavy door in a small gray room that smelled faintly of coffee and toner. On the table, a file waited, thick, worn, marked evidentiary extract. He didn't waste time. We pulled more from the iPad after securing a federal warrant. I need you to see this. The first document was a spreadsheet, accounts transfers, offshore banks I couldn't pronounce. Then came the emails. Contracts, supply chain lists, coded language that made no sense to me until he explained. Delaney was helping reroute pharmaceutical-grade materials to unregulated labs. Not just money laundering, this is production of counterfeit medications on a mass scale. I blinked at the screen. But she works in marketing. That's what she always said. She worked in logistics, too. On paper, it's minor. In practice, she knew everything. He turned the page. My eyes caught on a photograph. A wide-angle shot of a river near an industrial zone, gray water chemical foam on the surface. I recognized the banks immediately. That's near Millridge, I said slowly. My grandson swims there every summer. He nodded. We traced manufacturing runoff from one of their shell factories. The environmental violations go back years. Local kids have reported rashes, nausea. No one's connected the dots until now. I reached for the image, my fingers trembling. Jaime's laughter echoed in my head, the sound of his wet sneakers slapping against my porch. They poisoned it, I said. The water. The kids. Moyer didn't argue. Delaney's name is on enough approvals to draw the net around her. But we're not just talking state charges. This is federal now. Fraud. Environmental crimes. Public endangerment. I sat back stunned. I'd come thinking I'd hand over a recording. I didn't expect to find out that the woman making pancakes for my grandson had helped poison the water he bathed in. I stood. "What do you need from me?" Your eyes, Moyer said. "Your memory, your access. We'll protect you." I nodded already, thinking of what I needed to do before I returned home. Marshall came home late that afternoon, still in his work uniform, dust on his boots, and fatigue in his eyes. I waited for him in the kitchen, my hands clasped around a mug gone cold hours ago. When he saw me sitting there, he smiled faintly, thinking it was just another quiet evening. "Marshall," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We need to talk about Delaney." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "What now, Mom?" "She said there was a mix-up at school. Everything's fine." "It isn't," I said softly. "I've spoken with the detective. I've seen what's on that iPad. Money transfers, messages, documents that tie her to something criminal." He laughed once, sharp and short. "Mom, please. You don't understand her work. Those files probably mean nothing out of context. They mean everything I said. And she knows it." "You didn't see her face when I mentioned the iPad." His expression hardened. "You've never liked her. You're looking for something to be right about." "That's not fair," I said, standing now, the chair scraping the tile. "I wanted to be wrong." He shook his head, eyes glassy with anger. "You're going to tear this family apart. You'll ruin Jaime's life with your paranoia." I opened my mouth to answer, but he was already walking down the hall. The door to their bedroom shut hard enough to rattle the dishes in the cupboard. When dinner came, Delaney plated roast chicken, poured wine, and asked about his day, like nothing had cracked beneath their roof. Marshall forced a smile, exhausted and unwilling to meet my eyes. Jaime hummed softly at the table, tracing shapes in his mashed potatoes. Delaney laughed once, light and false, and touched my arm as she passed the serving bowl. "You've been so quiet, Inez." "Everything all right." Her fingers were cool against my skin. I looked at her and saw everything the detective had shown me. Numbers, signatures, poison in the water. That night, I lay awake listening to the house breathe, waiting for the moment it would stop pretending to be whole. It started with spilled water. Jaime had only reached too far across the table, his elbow catching the glass. It tipped and soaked Delaney's planner, a thick leather-bound thing she guarded more fiercely than her own phone. "You need to be more careful," she snapped, the sharpness in her voice cutting clean through the room. Jaime froze, his lip trembling. I reached for a towel, quick to clean, but Delaney was already yanking the planner from the puddle, muttering under her breath. "It's just water," I said gently. Her eyes met mine. "Stay out of it." Then quieter, so only I could hear, "Keep meddling, and you'll regret it." She smiled, right after the way people do in photos, when someone says cheese. I stood there holding the wet towel in my hand, my stomach a knot of something old and furious. Later, I knocked on Rosa's door down the street. Just for an hour, I told her, watching Jaime step inside with his backpack and stuffed elephant. I kissed his forehead, whispered that I'd be back before sunset. I made it home in time to see Delaney backing out of the driveway. She wore red lipstick and a blazer, too much for a last-minute work meeting. I called a cab and told the driver to keep a generous distance behind the black sedan. She drove with confidence, no glances in the mirror, no signs of worry. 20 minutes later, we pulled into a parking lot outside a bar downtown, one of those places with mirrored windows and no clear hours. And then I saw him. Wes Calderon stepped out from a silver SUV, tall and lean in a dark coat. Delaney approached him fast, like someone used to falling into place beside him. They spoke briefly, then disappeared through the side entrance. I paid the driver and stepped out, the air suddenly too thin. My hand shook as I reached for my phone, not to call anyone, just to remind myself I wasn't dreaming. 2 days passed before Detective Moyer called again. His voice was clipped urgent. "They're moving." We intercepted a message Delaney and Calderon booked flights under false names. "Miami tonight. We need visual confirmation." By the time I hung up, Marshall was sitting at the table, head in his hands. He hadn't spoken to me much since our argument, but now he just said quietly, "What do you mean, flights?" I told him everything. The iPad, the photos, the money, the phone calls. Every piece I'd tried to protect him from. His face went pale, as if someone had drained the air from his lungs. "Come with me," I said. "See it for yourself." We met Moyer at the airport an hour later. He briefed us quickly, eyes scanning the crowds. "You'll stay at a distance. If they show, just confirm. Our team will handle the rest." Marshall nodded silent, gripping the railing beside him. From our corner near the observation glass, we watched passengers move through security families, business travelers, the rhythm of normal life. Then I saw her. Delaney hair pinned up, wearing a long gray coat I'd never seen before. Beside her was Calderon, calm, confident, carrying 2 matching passports. They looked like a couple on vacation, not 2 people about to vanish from the wreckage they'd made. Marshall stiffened his voice, barely a whisper. "That's her." She turned just then, smiling faintly at Calderon. The smile I'd seen at our dinner table, the one she used to disarm, to lie, to make us believe she was still ours. Moyer's signal went out. Within seconds, 2 plainclothes officers closed in. Calderon tried to run, but one grabbed his arm and drove him to the ground. Delaney's scream broke through the terminal, high and wild. "You don't understand." I was forced. Marshall's hand gripped mine, shaking. "She was never who I thought," he said. I couldn't speak. I just watched as they led her away, still shouting his name, long after he'd turned his face toward the floor. The house was too quiet after everything. Marshall sat on the couch for hours, not turning on the television, not answering calls. He hadn't gone back to work, hadn't spoken more than a handful of words since the arrest. I moved around him softly, bringing tea he didn't drink, folding blankets he didn't use. Jaime came home from school, with his backpack dragging behind him, face pale and eyes searching. He looked around, then whispered, "Where's Mom?" I knelt in front of him. "She had to go away for a while, sweetheart. But you're safe. You're here with us." He nodded, but I could see the confusion behind his eyes, the kind a child can't name. That night, he slept in my bed again, curled into me like he did when he was a toddler and afraid of the wind. I kept my hand on his back, feeling the shallow rhythm of his breathing. Marshall didn't come to dinner. He stood by the window, staring out at nothing. "She lied to me, Ma. I believed every word she ever said." His voice cracked like dry wood. I didn't answer. Some grief can't be fixed with words. Some pain just needs room to sit and breathe. The next morning, an envelope arrived. I recognized the courthouse seal before I even opened it. Inside, a request: would I be willing to serve as a witness in the ongoing case against Delaney? There was no question in my mind. I signed it the same day and called the number they listed. Afterwards, I sat on the edge of my bed, the paperwork spread out in front of me. Jaime's crayon drawing, one he'd made weeks ago, peeked out from under the forms. It was a picture of our house with all of us smiling. His hand had labeled each stick figure carefully: Mom, Dad, me, and Abwe. He had drawn the sun too big and the trees too crooked, but it was the happiest image I'd seen in weeks. I folded it gently and placed it on top. Then I stood up, smoothed the blanket, and called for Jaime to get his shoes. They called my name, and I stood. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not the temperature, but the way time seemed to freeze inside it. People barely breathing, the weight of words, yet to be spoken, hanging in the air. I walked to the witness stand, knees steady, voice ready, heart not so much. Delaney didn't look at me when I took my oath. She kept her eyes fixed on the table in front of her, fingers pressed tight together like she was holding on to something slipping. Across the aisle, Wes Calderon sat with his lawyer, smug and untouched. He wouldn't look at anyone. Marshall sat in the gallery, not behind her, not behind me, just there. arms crossed, jaw set, still wearing the same jacket he'd had on the night he saw her walk through airport security. He hadn't said much since, but he came. I told the truth. Not every detail, not the kind that hurt for no reason, but enough. Enough for the jury to understand how the iPad came to light, why I contacted Detective Moyer, what I overheard, and what I saw. Enough to show how close danger had come to a child's quiet life. I didn't speak of betrayal. I didn't need to. When it was over, I stepped down without looking back. We went home. The house felt full again, but differently. There were no whispers behind doors, no silences thick with things unsaid. Jaime no longer asked about his mother. He didn't talk about the airport, or the news, or even the courtroom. He chased squirrels in the backyard, built forts out of laundry baskets, laughed loud and often. Sometimes at night, I'd hear Marshall pacing the kitchen. Once I found him at the table with his head in his hands. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just looked up at me and nodded. That was enough. I never gave an interview, never spoke to reporters. Let the court have its verdicts and the papers their headlines. I had what I needed, his feet hitting the grass, his laughter bouncing off the fence, his arms wrapped around my neck at the end of a long day.